Last in our installment this term of the Learn to Learn seminar series. Today's topic is exam writing skills. So if you've been following along throughout the whole series, this is sort of the culmination of all of our efforts so far. My name is Matthew Wisa. I'm a learning strategist here at SAIT in the Lamb Learner Success Center, and my job is to help students, especially students who are struggling or have some kind of barrier to learning, to get the most out of their studies and learn to learn more effectively and efficiently. So this seminar series is just my attempt to make that information open to anyone who wants it, even people who might not want to come in for an appointment or feel that they're not quite to the level that they need kind of that much one-on-one attention. So yeah, let's get started and we'll talk a little bit about exam skills. I'll just share my screen here. Okay, yeah, let's get started. So as always, I like to have a few questions to kind of help guide us in terms of what we're talking about and what we're trying to learn. Um, Today, we're going to look at what are the three stages of exam writing. I've split up the different stages of exam writing into these three separate stages. So we'll talk about that. We're going to talk about how to prepare effectively for exams, to get ready for them, to commit information to memory and things like that. There'll be some review of topics we've covered in other sessions, but we're going to talk about a bunch of new stuff today. So it might be a small amount of review, but mostly it's going to be stuff we have not talked about before. Um, we're going to look at what are some good strategies for writing exams once we're in the exam. Uh, we're going to learn how to deal with a really common problem when it comes to test writing, which is test anxiety. I would say uh, test anxiety's top three reasons why students come in. Um, and so we'll talk about a few strategies for that. We'll also look at what we should do after we're done writing the exam, um, other than popping the champagne and all that kind of stuff. All right, let's get going. So we are going today to learn to say goodbye to our bad grades with this one simple trick that they don't want you to know about. Who are they? I'm not sure, but they don't want you to know about this. Um, so we are going to use this one simple trick to help us get the most out of our time here at SAIT. And of course, the trick is that you have to study, which is not always what we want to hear, but there's really no simple trick to getting good grades. It's a lot of little things done well and consistently, and that's how we kind of do it. It's a skill like any other skill that you can learn to be better at. So we're going to look at how we're going to do that today when it comes to exams. So, as promised, uh, we're going to talk about the three stages of exam writing. And the three stages, of course, are preparation, uh, writing the exam, the actual writing process, and review. So, this is what some things that we're going to do after the exam. So, let's start by talking about preparation. So, how do we prepare effectively for exams? Um, what do we need to do to get ready for exams? What do we need to do to put ourselves in the best position to do our best on our tests? So, in terms of preparation, um, one of the really important things is the little habits that we have every day that we are doing consistently throughout the term. Uh, Preparation for exams don't start the night before or the week before. Preparation for exam is ongoing from the very first time you step into class all the way until you walk out of your last exam. Um, So there's lots to know about this. As I mentioned, I'm not going to, just rehash what we've talked about in other seminars. So if you want more information on things to do before class, in class, after class, before exams, um, you can check out the study skills seminar link. When I send out the link to this seminar, you'll see all of the other links to the previous topics, so you can check those out. If not, I'll put my email up at the end of the discussion today, and you can just shoot me an email, ask for one of the other topics you want. But I'm going to talk about a lot of things that we talked about in the study skills class, or not going to talk about, but I'm going to quickly review a lot of the things that we talked about in the study skills seminar, a little bit in the memory skills seminar, and a few of the other ones as well. But if you want to learn more about building good study habits and what we're doing every day to kind of do our best, the study skills seminar is a good place to go for that. But in a nutshell, what you want to do is set up a strategy that you can replicate every day. Uh, Post-secondary is a marathon, not a sprint. And so you have to manage your energy, have strategies that are doable and repeatable, and that you're not going to just burn out on within 3 weeks of starting the term. You want to have consistent study habits. And so we talk a lot about that in the study skills seminar. The more good habits you build, you'll just find exams getting easier and easier. And in a lot of cases, you'll find that a lot of the anxiety goes away as well. So, what does good exam prep look like? One of the big tips is don't wait. Start early. As I just mentioned, really you're preparing from day one. Um, but as we talk about in the conversation about the learning cycle, before, during, after, and exam prep kind of sessions, there are extra activities you want to start doing uh, uh, ahead of the exam that are different than your normal sort of review, note taking, all of that kind of stuff. So but start early, don't start the night before or 2 days before. Try to give yourself a week or two, if possible. I know that some programs will just have like an exam a week. So that might look a little bit different. But if you're just having a few exams throughout the course of the term, you're going to start, a week or two ahead of time preparing. It helps to have a plan rather than just kind of opening your book to a random page and starting studying. You want to have a bit of a plan. We're going to look at that more as we go. You want to space out your studying. So another thing that we'll talk a little bit more about. I talk a lot about it in many of the other seminars. We talk about, setting a timer for brief periods with shorter breaks. We talk about switching topics. We'll revisit that a little bit. Avoid rereading as your main strategy. Rereading is important for certain things, but as your main study strategy, it's not a good one. We'll talk about what are good ones and practicing remembering rather than just rereading. So these are really important general kind of tips to uh, your exam prep. Okay, so how do we make a plan? Making a plan is important. How do we actually do that effectively? An important part of that is not trying to memorize every single little thing from start to finish. We want to be selective about what we're choosing to focus our time, effort, energy, attention, all of these things on. So we're going to be selective. We're going to uh, um, not try to memorize every single detail. We're going to pull out the main themes. We're going to pull out the main um, activities, skills, these sorts of things that our instructor is trying to get us to understand or to learn to be able to do ourselves. So we're going to focus. Part of being selective is focusing more time on the things that we find challenging, the things that we had trouble remembering. If you spend too much time on things that you already know quite well, you're going to struggle when it comes to the things that you're not as good with. Organizing the information is very important. Um, Information that's organized into categories that make sense that we can use to cue ourselves to retrieving the information that we need is really an important part of getting ready for the exam. Um, so you want to make sure that you are uh, clearly setting up your notes or your study guide or whatever it is that you're studying from, your flashcards. You want to set them up in a way where the information is very clearly organized into logical categories. I talk more about that in the memory skills seminar. Um, but okay, so how do we do these things? How do we be selective? How do we, organize the information? How do we know how to do these things? And there's a bunch of uh, methods for doing that. A few that are important to know would be paying really close attention to all the cues in class that you're getting from your instructor. So the little hints that they're giving you, things like how much time they're spending on some topics versus other topics. If your instructor spends a whole class on one topic, but only 5 minutes on another topic, you should spend more time likely studying the one that they spent the most time on. Um, After a little bit of time, you get kind of a sense for what your instructor does to cue you, but you're looking for those cues, body language, things that they're writing on the board, the things that they're dedicating slides to if they're doing PowerPoint presentations, things like that. Um, Anything that they post that is some sort of study guide or practice tests or practice questions. These are all really helpful things to pay attention to when we're trying to choose what to study, not just the things that are in the study guides and the practice tests, but the way that the information is presented can give us a sense for what we need to look at. Any sort of Brightspace or D2L resources. If they're putting readings in D2L, for example, you might not have a question on every detail in the reading, but the main topic of the reading, there'll likely be some kind of question or more on. Another underrated sort of method is to just ask. Oftentimes, if you're struggling to figure out what's important and what the main themes are, asking your instructor can sort of help to get them to pull those out for you. And a really underutilized tool is the course outline. A lot of people don't realize how much good information is in the course outline. Um, and so this is an example of some of the things that I would say are really important in the course outline. There's lots of good information at the start about how much assignments are worth, general descriptions of the course, what textbook you might use, but the for exam preparation, using the learning objectives towards the end of the course outline is a really strong way to um, do some of the things that we've just been talking about, pulling out main themes, figuring out what we're good at, all of these kinds of different things. So all of the courses at SAIT that are for credit have a course outline, and all of the course outlines have these learning outcomes, often split into objectives, and the format is similar across all sort of courses. So getting used to using these in one course will help you transfer that skill to doing the same thing in another course. Um, so one way to use these is to use them to help pick out the main themes. The objectives that are listed here, so like, let's say 2.1, distinguish between direct and indirect sentence structures. If I'm going through the materials, my notes that I've taken, readings that I've been given, any mention of direct and indirect sentence structures, I'm looking at closely, because I see that that is a main theme or topic of the course. Other little ideas that are associated with that are important as well, but don't miss the forest for the trees. So for that example, distinguish between direct and indirect sentence structures. I would probably want to, for example, know the definitions of direct and indirect sentence structures. I would want to know a little bit about what a sentence structure entails and what it is. And then I want to be able to compare and contrast the two different types of sentence structures and probably know which one is the one that I want to use in certain situations and not in other situations, for example. Um, Other things to use the course outlines for are things like um, pulling out at what level we need to know the information. So this first word in the objective gives us a lot of tips and clues about how we're going to use the information. So the format is going to be this verb, this action word, followed by a concept. And then we are going to use that first action word, the verb, to um, figure out what level we need to know things. So objectives that talk about analyze that ask you to analyze something means that you're going to have more details. You're going to need to be able to, you know, compare and contrast, understand how it's used, understand why it's helpful. Whereas if it's something like identify or describe or list or something like that, it might be at a little bit more general kind of level. You might not need to know as many details about it. And so in this example, um, if you're doing an assignment about using different modes of business communication, um, you need to be able to, in this case, the 4.1 example, identify when it's appropriate. Whereas in 3.3, we're looking at analyzing a workplace audience to determine the necessary content of a message. In that case, I would want to know how to do that more effectively rather than just kind of identify, like, when it's appropriate to do that. So yeah, the course outline, the learning objectives has a lot of tips um, for what to study. It's helpful to convert these into questions when you're going through your materials. So, in the previous slide example of 2.1, distinguish between direct and indirect sentence structures, I'm making sure that I'm pulling that information out of my materials by maybe turning it into a question like, what is a direct sentence structure? What is an indirect sentence structure? What is the difference between a direct and an indirect sentence structure? And you might even see those questions pop up on the exam. So start practicing with that. You'll find it comes in really handy in making a plan. So another thing to do to get ready for exams is to be prepared, not in terms of what you're studying or how you're studying, but in terms of all of the other logistical kind of things that go along with writing an exam. So things like knowing the date and the time and where it is and how long it's going to be so that we can plan our day so we can get there on time. We're not feeling stressed. Is it going to be online? If it's online, do I have my lockdown browser set up? Is my room set up for the test? For some tests, for example, you're not allowed to have certain things hanging on the walls or those sorts of things. Um, or they might make you scan around the room to show that there's no things that you're going to cheat with on there, stuff like that. Get that ready ahead of time. Don't wait till 5 minutes before the exam to get that sorted. I've worked with lots of students who um, miss exams, are late to exams because They thought it was in class, it turned out to be online, things like that. So you want to know what's going to be covered, the format, so that you can direct your studying efforts towards those areas. We'll talk a little bit about um, how to write for different kinds of formats later on. But knowing the format will be helpful in preparing. You want to know how many questions there's going to be. You're going to want to know what you can bring into the exams. Can I bring a calculator? Does it have to be a certain kind of calculator? Is it open book? Can I bring a cheat sheet? How long is the cheat sheet? All of these kinds of things. And then also things like getting a good sleep, eating, breakfast that morning if you have an early morning exam, drinking lots of water, drinking caffeine, but not too much caffeine, things like that. You want to treat it as though you are an athlete getting ready for, a big competition or something like that. You want to make sure that your body is in good shape to do well on the exam. Um, and don't neglect all the little habits and rituals and things like that. Um, um, Having a set of habits and routines can really help to deal with test anxiety, can really help to prime ourselves to do our best, to pull the information out that we need. Um, I talked about baseball magic here. There's a classic anthropological um, paper about all the little rituals that baseball players use. And so you can use those as well. It's things like, you hear about this with athletes all the time, putting, their left sock on first before their right sock, or not stepping on a certain line, or eating the same breakfast on every game day, things like that. These little habits help get us ready for what's coming next and to make things more predictable and certain. So use those things to your example, or use those things to your benefit, I should say. Um, okay, so how do we get ready for exams? Some general kind of tips about our study habits and things like that. As I mentioned, we talk about this a lot in the study skills seminar and the memory skills seminar. Um, but some important general kind of ideas are to spend time practicing remembering. So don't just reread your notes over and over again. There's lots of studies that show this is not a good way of getting information into your long-term memory. What you want to do is practice getting the information back out, not just putting it in. So doing some sort of retrieval or recall practice, things like flashcards, quizzing yourself without looking at your notes. You mainly want to get used to not having the information in front of you while you're answering the questions. Um, uh, when you're just doing normal review, like your daily review of what you learned that day and things like that, you can just sort of reread and, do some highlighting, reorganize your notes a little bit, things like that. But when you're actually trying to prepare for the exam, you want to try to incorporate some exam-like conditions. So, doing things like giving yourself a time limit when you're doing practice problems, or um, doing it in a busy place where there's distractions. If you're always studying in a perfectly quiet, comfortable location, and then the exam is in a smelly gym with a bunch of people coughing, um, that might throw you off. And so it's good to have like a dedicated study area. We talk a lot about this in other seminars. Um, but if you always learn in the same context of a quiet room, it might be more difficult when you're actually in the exam. So try to incorporate some exam-like conditions um, if necessary. Um, so this is one of the reasons why asking questions about the exam is important. So you can use that information to make your studying more like the exam. You can even use AI. I talk about this a lot in the AI skills seminar, but you can use AI to create practice tests to quiz you, and through some careful prompting, you can get it to be very similar to what your actual exam is going to be like. Identify weaknesses. This is another thing that you can do with the learning objectives in the course outline, is go through and just rank them in terms of how well you know them, how easy you find them to remember. Maybe star ones that you struggle with, or you know, do 1, 2, 3 stars, or put a check mark or an X beside them. Some kind of system where you're identifying what you need to study more and what you can kind of just do brief studying with. The consistency is more important than the intensity. So doing a little bit each day is going to yield better results typically than, waiting to the last minute and doing a whole bunch all at once. I use the analogy um, of someone who is training for a weightlifting competition. Uh, Probably the worst way to get ready to do some sort of powerlifting competition would be to do no weightlifting at all until the night before, and then spend 12 hours furiously lifting weights. Um, it's not even really possible. You'll hurt yourself, and you're not going to get good results the next day when you're at the competition. Instead, you start early, you lift weights a little bit, you take a break, you lift weights a little bit, you take a break, and it's in the breaks where you're making a lot of the gains. And studying's a lot like that as well. It's not necessarily the time that you're studying where you encode the information into your memory. It's when you're resting, when you're not thinking about it, when you're sleeping. Um, and so you need to have both and a good balance of both. Okay. So talked a little bit about preparation. Preparation is obviously the longest stage and has the most to it. But as I mentioned, I talk a lot about the preparation part in the other seminars. So we're going to focus a little bit more on the actual writing and review stages here, and a little bit of extra focus on test anxiety. So yeah, we've talked about preparation. We're going to talk about how to write exams now. So what are some good strategies for writing exams? Some general tips. Um, you want to read all of the instructions carefully. So we're at the point now where we've prepared, we've figured out all the time and location and all of that kind of information, and we're sitting at our desk, and the teacher says, "Okay, start writing your test." First thing is make sure you're reading all the instructions carefully. You're listening to for any instructions. Um, this is missed more often than you would think because it's an unusual situation. We're feeling nervous, and so we miss some things that under normal circumstances we would do a really good job um, of doing. And so make sure that you make a point of reading all the instructions carefully. Make a plan of attack. Scan through the exam, see what the questions kind of look like, see how many questions there are, make a little bit of a plan about how you're going to go about it. We'll talk about some plans and strategies here in a few minutes. Some people really benefit from doing a brain dump before you start writing the exam. So if you have, some scrap paper or on the back of the exam or something like that, um, writing down a brief outline of all of the things that are going to be on the exam that you've studied, and it just kind of starts lighting up those parts of your brain in the way that you want, and priming yourself to get the information back out rather than doing it one question at a time. You're kind of uh, making a bit of an attempt to kind of get that information ready. Make sure that you're attempting every question. You're better off putting something rather than nothing, even if you have no idea what the answer is. We'll talk about that more when we're looking at specific types of questions. Don't overthink it. A lot of students get into trouble by staring at one word in the question for half an hour, trying to figure out exactly what the instructor means by it, or second guessing answers that you've already given. Changing answers that you've already written down, unless you know for sure that you made a mistake. Typically, we change them to the wrong answers. We'll talk about that more as well. And manage your time. Um, um, so how do we do that? How do we get ready for exams? Or how do we get ready for managing our time in exams? So we're doing things like estimating the time per question. You can do this ahead of time, but knowing that you have 1 minute per question means you can kind of gauge how long, if you're taking too long on a question or not. Setting larger time checkpoints so that you can, every 15 minutes check and make sure that you're on track to finish on time, something like that. Um, if you do struggle to get your tests done on time, shoot for getting 60% of the exam done in the first half of the time that you have. So to free yourself up with a little extra time at the end and just, you know, cope with that time dilation that we get sometimes. Do timed practice when you're studying. So when you're studying, if you know you're going to do 10 math questions on the test in half an hour, try to do 10 math questions in practice in 20 minutes or 25 minutes. This will give you the illusion of more time when you are in the exam. Check the clock, but not too much. There's a balance to strike there. You want to check the clock often enough that time is not getting away from you. But if you're spending too much time staring at the clock and stressing out, that's not really helping you either. So you got to figure out kind of a middle range. And leave time for the end to check your work. Uh, the one caution about that is don't leave time to go back and change all your answers that you've already put. That's a surefire way to do worse on the exam. Okay. So one of the ways to manage our time and a few other things is using what we call the three sweep approach. So basically, the idea is you're going into the exam knowing that you are going to go through 3 times before you're finished. The first time through, you're doing just the quickest, easiest, shortest questions that you know the answers to for sure. You look at the question and within 5 seconds, oh yeah, that one, I know that one. You're doing all those first. If you're looking at the question and you're like, it's taking more than 10 seconds and you're like, oh, I don't know, it could be this, could be that, skip it, move on to the next one. When you get to the end, start back at the start, go through a second time. A little bit slower, doing the more difficult questions. Um, the first sweep, if it takes you longer than 5 or 10 seconds to know the answer, you're moving on. Second time through, maybe you spend 30 seconds instead on the ones that are remaining. So, this gives you a little more thinking time. You've already seen the question once, and your subconscious can kind of work on getting the answer a little bit. But if it's taking longer than 30 seconds, skip it, leave it to the very end. And then on the third sweep through, you're just going through and doing the last few questions that you didn't know the answer to. This strategy does a few things. For one, it helps you manage your time so that if you do run out of time, you've answered all the questions that you definitely know the answer to, and that will help you get higher grades if you do run out of time. The other things that it does for you is there are often clues in later questions that you can kind of use to answer previous questions. So by going through the exam a couple times, you can see those clues a few times before you try the hardest questions. And then it also gives you some thinking time on some of the hard ones while you're doing the easier ones. Gives your subconscious a little bit of time to catch up. Um, this is actually quite a powerful strategy. A lot of students who didn't have an exam strategy and starts doing this, they often see big improvements. In fact, I had a student a few years ago now who went from a C to a B just by doing this. Um, yes, a powerful strategy for sure. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the format of the exam. The format of the exam should inform your preparations. so that you're preparing under exam-like conditions, as I mentioned. So if you know it's going to be a multiple choice um, exam, um, try to do multiple choice questions to prepare. Or when you're reading your notes, think about how you would write a multiple choice question uh, to um, to ask about that particular topic. So if it's, distinguishing direct and indirect sentence structure, maybe you could imagine, okay, I could see on an exam there being a question that says, which of the following is one of the which of the following is a characteristic of an indirect sentence structure? And you look through the questions, or you look through the information, and maybe you come up with some answers yourself. Um, So yes, the format should inform your preparations, but also your strategy for writing the exam. So let's talk about a few strategies for different kinds of questions. So multiple choice, I'd say, is the most common kind of question that I see at SATE. I work with students from all different programs, apprentice, degree, diploma, certificate, all different schools, and multiple choice is definitely the most common. With multiple choice, you really have to expect a range of difficulties. If you have 50 multiple choice questions, maybe 30 of them are pretty easy, 10 of them are hard, and another 10 are really hard and almost impossible to get, or something like that. So expect a range of difficulties when you're studying. Uh, you know, Consider how that might look when you're in the exam. And as I mentioned, exam-like conditions, try to make your studying as much like the exam as possible. AI is really good at creating multiple choice questions. You can paste your notes in, um, or if it's like a widely known topic, like things like anatomy or something like that, then you can use AI to create questions for you. Try pasting the learning objectives that are relevant to the exam that you're doing and ask it to focus its questions on those topics. That's a good way to really narrow it down. You don't want to be answering questions on things that was on the last exam and isn't going to be covered on this exam, or things that are going to be on the next exam. So figure out which learning objectives are covered by the exam and paste those in. Tell ChatGPT or whatever, you know, uh, constrain your questions to these topics. Composing your own questions to practice, I talked about a little bit already, but this is a really underutilized technique to help start learning to predict more what's going to be on the exam. With a little bit of practice and using tools like the course outline, you can really get a good sense for what's going to be on the exam. Okay. So other tips for multiple choice, read carefully and pay especially close attention to some of the kind of in between words. So things like not, except, always, never, those often make the correct answer the correct answer. So pay really close attention, underline it, circle it if you're writing your exam on paper. Try producing your own answer first. So read the question before you look at the four choices or five choices. Um, Try to answer the question on your own, and then look at the answers. Oftentimes it'll just kind of pop right out at you because you've already gotten a big chunk of the answer. It helps you kind of a big thing with multiple choice is, since the answer is there, it kind of relies on like little tricks and word games to differentiate between the best answer and the not as good answers. So producing your own answer can be a way of kind of not being fooled by some of those tricks. Use a process of elimination, do two rounds, go through the answers once, say, oh, it's definitely not A, it's definitely not D. Okay, is it B or is it C? Kind of gives your brain a chance to focus on the most likely choices and not be, misled by a bunch of red herrings or like, confusing kind of false answers. I'm sure you've heard this before, but choose the best answer, not just the right answer. Usually, the purpose for this advice is so that um, aren't going through the list A, B, C, D. You look at A, and you're like, oh yeah, that's right. A, move on to the next one. Read all the answers. There might be one that's better. Maybe A is right. Maybe there's another one that's slightly better. Maybe there's some options like all of the above or none of the above, something like that. Don't obsess or second guess. This is extra important with multiple choice. It's true of all kinds of questions, but multiple choice is particularly bad for when we reread them to think, oh, I messed that up. I'm going to change my answer. You're more likely to change it to the wrong answer if you do change it, unless, of course, you made an obvious mistake that you're sure about. So maybe you thought it said, one thing when it said something else, or maybe you thought that said, 76, but it was 16, something like that. If you know you made a mistake, then yeah, change it. But if you're just like, ooh, actually, I don't know, maybe it's this, you're better off leaving it and just not even looking at it again. Answer every question with multiple choice. You at least have a chance of getting the right answer, even if you're guessing. But ignore the cliche advice of, choose C if you're not sure. Um, because, they don't want to make it early in the answers. They don't want to make it late in the answers. Doesn't can't be the first, can't be the last. That's not really actually true. Um, a lot of tests are just kind of randomly assigned which one it's going to be. But even if the instructor is choosing, they've heard that choose C if you're not sure, and so they're going to make sure it's not C. I've also heard the advice, oh, instructors know about the C thing, so actually choose B instead. Again, oftentimes these are different, and if you're writing online, the order might change between you and another student. It might not even be the same for every person. So, yeah, ignore that kind of advice. Short answer, another common um, question type might ask you to do things like list, name, define, identify. You might have already connected that you'll see these exact kind of words in the learning objectives. This is why using the learning objectives to make some guesses or create practice questions can get you really close to what it's going to look like on the exam. Um, you can look at how many marks it's worth as well. So if in the learning objectives, it's list the five, methods for sterilizing medical instruments, um, you might have a question about medical instruments worth 5 marks. So you have to get all five. So it can kind of help you do that. Be really clear and concise. Don't ramble on and dump as much all the information about the question into it. Um, it just makes it harder to mark, and you're not going to sort of be given marks for those kinds of things. And don't answer questions that aren't being asked. A lot of students will be like unsure about a particular question, so they kind of go off into a different question that they know more about. So avoid that. You're better off writing one thing that you do know about that question rather than five things about some other topic. Um, this is also true of things like, matching, um, true and false, all of those kinds of things. Though true and false is kind of more like multiple choice, to be honest. Okay, so another type of exam that's getting more common, I think I would say, are open book exams. So these are exams where you're allowed to look at your materials, often specific materials. So you can't just like open, Copilot and just ask it all the questions. It might be specific things like your textbook or a certain amount of notes or whatever. But the idea is this tests your understanding, not just your memory. Um, Instructors that give these kinds of exams, they want to know that you understand the concepts and can use them in a job-like situation rather than just like artificially remember them on a test. They're often like higher level thinking questions, so more like the analyze or compare and contrast in the learning objectives, more than just the identify or the describe. My best advice for open book exams is treat it like a closed book exam. You still need to prepare. You can't think that you're going to be able to just like go to the index and like pick out the answers. I've fallen into that trap myself many years ago, where I was like, I got the textbook. I'll just look it up in the textbook. Nope, took way too long, ran out of time, did really poorly. So prepare like it's a closed book exam, with just some small changes. For example, I would really suggest creating some kind of summarized document that you can use to help answer the questions. So do the things we've been talking about, figure out what's on the exam and those sorts of things, and then uh, try to write what you think are the answers on a piece of paper, or create a concept map, or do an outline of all the most important things, point form, written simply. Um, maybe even, or you can even do things like, if you can bring in your whole textbook, put a bunch of sticky notes in the pages that are going to be covered, for example, so you can find the stuff quickly. Make sure you ask ahead of time what's exactly allowed. Um, you know, you might not be able to bring every little thing in. Know if it's one piece of paper or two pieces of paper, one side, both sides, that kind of stuff. And be careful about plagiarizing too. Just because it's an exam instead of like an assignment you're handing in doesn't mean you should just write verbatim from the textbook. Paraphrase, put it into your own words. Um, if you need more help with that, we have a series of seminars that our writing specialist puts on, that talks about things like paraphrasing and plagiarism and things like that. Okay, so we've written the exam. Uh, what do we do next? Um, Once the exam's done, there's a few things that are a good idea to start getting the habit of doing. One is rewarding yourself and relaxing. That's really important, of course. Especially if you've done all the things that you set out to do, reward yourself, take a rest, do something that you enjoy doing, and that'll help you get motivated the next time. But another thing that gets neglected a lot is review the exam if you can. So best if you can actually see it, the one that you've written. Um, just seeing your mark is helpful, but seeing the actual questions and what answers you picked and what the correct answers are, is even better. There are some programs, some instructors, they don't want to hand them out. Maybe they're going to reuse the questions again, or they have another class that semester writing that exam or something like that. But if you can, look at what you did and see where you went wrong. Focus on the questions you got wrong, but look at the questions you got right too. You can also use it to help you kind of figure out the pattern for the next time too, to help you predict more what's going to be on there. And once you reviewed, look at what you got wrong. If you notice at certain topics, do a little bit of review on those topics. If it's something you're going to need for the next exam, make sure that you shore up those kind of weaknesses, or adjust your study habits. Did you wait too long and you had to cram? Did you start too early and then didn't do any studying right before the exam and forgot some stuff? Adjust your study habits. Okay, so last topic, how do we deal with test anxiety? As I mentioned, this is what I would say is one of the most common issues that students come in to talk to us about. It's a super common problem, and it's a major challenge for a lot of students. So if you're struggling greatly with test anxiety, or if you're experiencing a lot of general anxiety just in your everyday life, get help. There's lots of help available, a lot of free help here at SAIT. We have a whole department of counselors who can meet with you for free if you're not seeing a counselor already outside of SAIT, and give you a lot of personalized strategies for dealing with anxiety. A learning strategist like myself can help you with the study related parts of dealing with anxiety. But the counselors are best if it's more general to your everyday life and not just exams. And then just your normal support network. There's all sorts of people out there who can kind of help you with dealing with the anxiety. Okay. And just because you don't have strong test anxiety doesn't mean you can't benefit from these some of these techniques to help just improve your performance. Um, so focusing on maintaining your mental physical health is important. So all of the other things that you can do just to make sure your body's in a good state to do its best. So eating right, exercise, drinking water, having your caffeine but not too much, um, touching grass, bro, stuff like that. There's a lot of breathing exercises out there to deal with anxiety. I would pick one or two and try to stick with them and really practice doing them. You're not gonna the first time you do these, you're not gonna all of a sudden just have no anxiety left. It takes time. It's a skill to get good at, but even the first time, it's better than nothing. And with a little bit of practice, you can get quite good at using them. Um, there are certain things that just naturally lead us to feel calmer. So things like yawning, you can fake yawn until you real yawn, or you can watch videos of people yawning and get a contagious yawn. But yawning brings our heart rate down, brings our blood pressure down, makes us feel relaxed. Same with water on our face. So some people like to drink a lot of water. That helps. Some people go to the bathroom, splash water on the face. That helps. All things that bring down our heart rate and our blood pressure. Physiologic sighs, another breathing exercise. Box breathing. Box breathing is when you breathe in for 4 seconds, hold it for 4 seconds, breathe out for 4 seconds, hold it for 4 seconds. Do it 4 times, for example. Physiologic sigh is when you breathe in as much as you can, then you take another little breath, and then you breathe out slowly, while you count to three or something like that. Um, you can Google, if you don't like those or you just want more information, you can Google breathing exercises for anxiety. There's a ton. I'm sure you can find one that you like, but don't bounce around too much. Don't try it once. Oh, that doesn't work. Go to the next one. Oh, that doesn't work. You need a little bit of time with each one to figure out if you can really do it. And another one that's getting quite popular, it's often taught to people with things like attention disorders and things like that, is you do a moment where you focus on your senses to help ground yourself. So identifying 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can smell, 2 things you can feel, 1 thing you can taste. Another way to kind of help deal with it is examine and understand your reasons for feeling that way. So, 3 really common reasons people have anxiety, even if they don't know this is the reason. If you think about it, you can kind of figure out which one applies. But fear of the unknown. So, like, you don't know what's going to be on the exam. You don't know how it's going to go. There's all this unknowns. Um, the way you deal with this is make it as known as possible. Do all that prep work to figure out as much about the exam as possible. Get AI to create practice tests that match the ones you're going to be doing closely. Recreate the test conditions while you're studying. Make the studying harder, like giving yourself less time to do the same number of questions. Fear of inadequacy. So, being like, oh, I'm terrible at exams. I'm going to do bad. All that negative self-talk becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So we convince ourselves that we're going to do bad. We do bad. And then we say, see, I knew it. Um, but if you, the, what we say to ourselves in our head or out loud, we really pay attention to that more than we know. And so if you're always negatively talking about how bad you are at exams, you're going to start seeing that happening for real. So look at how you're preparing, know your weaknesses, try writing out what you're worried about. But know that uh, writing exams is a skill. You can get better at it. You can do it. And then a third one is fear of the stakes. So, oh my God, if I fail this exam, I'm going to fail my class and I'm not going to get a job and I'm going to die alone on the street. Um, we start to catastrophize. So try to put things into perspective, be realistic, um, avoid perfectionism. Don't let perfection be the enemy of the good. Um, be realistic about what we can accomplish. Know that we're not going to get 100% on every test, and that an A minus is good too. Yeah. So uh, today we looked at how we can prepare for exams, how we can write exams, what we should do after the exam. So we talked about those three stages. We talked about preparing effectively, doing lots of recall practice, studying under exam-like conditions, starting early, breaking it up into small pieces. We talked about good strategies for writing exams, like gathering all the information that we need, focusing on specific strategies for different types of questions, not changing our answers, at the end unless we're sure that we need to change it. Um, we talked about some breathing exercises for anxiety, understanding the reasons why we feel anxious, and some resources like the counseling center. And we talked about reviewing the exam and making some adjustments to our strategies. Yeah, so if you have any questions, please do shoot me an email. Again, my name is Matthew Esau. I'm a learning strategist here at SAIT, and you can make an appointment with me or one of the other strategists if you'd like as well. And we can help you do some personalized uh, learning practice or strategies. But yeah, best of luck in all your studies, and hope everything goes really well for you. Have a nice day. Bye, everyone.